And hello, fabulous AP students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I am excited to be with you today. Today, we're going to talk about the Second Great Awakening and many of the reforms that are going to happen because of the Second Great Awakening. So it's almost cause and effect, and largely. So I'm excited to be with you today. Let's get going. All right, so what are the causes of the religious reform going on here? So several factors are contributing to the Second Great Awakening. If you remember, the First Great Awakening happening in the 1700s, around we'll say the mid 1700s, right? And so now we have again between 1800 to 1850, probably around 1820, 1830 being the zenith of the Second Great Awakening. So there's a lot of emphasis growing in America on democracy and the individual that influenced politics and the arts reflected how people viewed religion. You have worshipers who were attracted to services that were more participatory rather than the stringent formality of like the Presbyterian Church. You have rational approach to religion favored by the deists and utilitarians prompted a reaction towards more emotional expressions of belief and worship service. So people want more enthusiasm in their worship service, if you will. They're looking for something a little bit more lively, maybe even a little something more interactive. You have the market revolution that happens, and that's going to cause people to fear that growing industry and commercializations were leading to increased greed and sin. So there's this attitude of all this economy and business is eroding society, if you will. And then you have the disruptions caused by the market revolution. The mobility of the people led them to look for worship settings that were outside formal churches based on urban areas. So we got some revivals happening here. Revivals basically, just a spur, something that's where a preach comes to teach, typically in the middle of nowhere, if you will, but it doesn't always have to be that way. So Timothy Dwight here, he's going to kind of be our founder, if you will. He's the president at Yale College, and he wants to get he's trying to reach out to the youngins, okay, to the younger group, because he's a Calvinist, right? And he's trying to kind of get the younger people to look again towards religion. He's trying to get all these liberal views that emerged in the 1790s. He's trying to basically launch a counteroffensive on it. So if he can get younger men to become evangelical preachers, then he feels like he can kind of preserve morality, if you will, and so anyway, so people were taught that salvation was for all people during this time. Charles Grandison Finney is going to kind of be one of the bigger names. He's going to go all throughout New York, and he's going to appeal to the people using people's emotions and, of course, the whole fear of damnation. He's going to encourage people to publicly declare that their revived faith. Um, you know, basically, declaring to the world that they're saved, basically. Um, and then you're also going to have upstate New York is going to become known as the burned over states district, which means that there was just so much revivals going on in upstate New York, and there's all these, sermons of hellfire and brimstone, and anyway, so it's gonna be known as the burned over district. Um, and then down the south, you're gonna get a lot of Baptists and Methodists who are gonna be doing revivals or camp meetings, if you will. And that's going to be good because it's going to activate a lot of people to kind of join Christianity and become religious. By 1850, the Baptists and Methodists were the largest Protestant denominations in the country. So it really did a great thing there for at least memberships in those two churches. So one of the results of the Second Great Awakening is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I know a little bit about this topic here. So Uh, anyway, so the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they were nicknames in history the Mormons, and their founder was a person known as Joseph Smith, and he lived in upstate New York in 1820. He's about 14 years old in 1820. He's in the burned over district, and he's all these people are coming to all around, to preach, and so he's kind of getting caught up in all this, and it starts making him ask this one question, like all these people are coming saying their church is right, their church is right. No, no, you should join this church, you should join the Episcopalian, you should join, and so everyone's going everywhere, and he starts questioning. He's like, well, which church is right? Which preacher is telling the truth here? I mean, if there's one God, why are there so many churches? So he started going around and asking, trying to solve this question, but every preacher started like teaching and interpreting the Bible, saying, one verse could mean two different meanings to either preacher. So he realized he couldn't use the Bible to solve this because everyone interpreted the Bible differently, in many respects. And so he eventually learned that he's just going to have to ask God himself. And he read a scripture in the Bible that said, if you're confused, ask God. So Joseph Smith goes into a nearby grove of trees near his house, and he prays to God and wants to ask that question. And during that time, he exclaimed that he had a spiritual experience in which he saw two personages, God the Father and his Son Jesus Christ. And he had the opportunity to ask which of all the churches on the earth were true, basically. Which of all these Christian churches were true. And he was told that he was to join none of them, none of them were true. And that in time, God would restore his church to the earth through Joseph Smith, his servant and eventually prophet. So anyway, so Joseph Smith is gonna claim that he was commanded to translate a record of the American Indians that was found on gold plates by the gift and power of God. This record is going to be known as the Book of Mormon. Now his followers uh, fled persecution from New York, Ohio, Missouri, and they will finally go to Illinois, Nauvoo, Illinois, where eventually Joseph will be murdered. So now the whole thing is, well, what happens? So Brigham Young, he rises up as the leader and basically tells the people, we're not safe here in America. They're not going to accept our beliefs, and so he moves all the followers into the far west, into the Rocky Mountains, where today we call the Great Salt Lake or Salt Lake City, right up in Utah. And so that community becomes named as the New Zion community. And anyway, so there are a few things that Joseph Smith taught that are controversial today. Joseph Smith approved the practice of polygamy, which caused greater opposition to the saints. However, in 1890, the church officially prohibited polygamy. So, anyway. All right, so reforms backed by religion. So we have some things happening here, right? So because of the Second Great Awakening, it's really causing people to rethink things. For one thing, drinking. There's way too much drinking going on, they thought. End of slavery. We have got to end this once and for all. And another one is we got to make it better treatment for people with mental illnesses or in prisons or even, people who are disabled, like the blind or the deaf or whatever. So all this Second Great Awakening is going to lead to a barrage, a cascade of effects happening. So one, we're going to look to improve society. So during this time period where all these reforms are happening, it's called the antebellum period, and that's the period that happens before the Civil War. So during this time, we're going to see movements like tax-supported public schools, controlling and ending of sales of alcohol, winning equal rights for women, and abolishing slavery. Now, reasons for these reforms are a couple. So you got the Puritan sense of I'm on a mission to make the world better kind of thing, right? You also have Enlightenment beliefs in human goodness that have been around since the 1600s. Um, you got the Jacksonians' emphasis on democracy. You have changes in relationships among men and women, social classes, and ethnic groups, especially with industrialization around the corner. Men are less in the home and more at work, which kind of leaves the mom to be the moral authority. And then you got the religious beliefs that are an important source of all this, right? So at first, reformers hoped to improve people's behavior through moral persuasion. However, after they tried sermons and pamphlets, they're going to go more the political route and seek change through reforms and making laws. So temperance was a really big one. It could have been one of the biggest ones here, and it's going to go for many decades into the 20th century. So alcohol was targeted as a cause for crime, poverty, abuse of women, and other social ills. Temperance became this really popular reform. You have the American Temperance Society that comes out as a result. In 1840, a group of recovering alcoholics formed the Washingtonians and argued that alcoholism was a disease that needed practical treatment. So German and Irish immigrants, they're not liking this so much. They're like, we're not all for this. And but the thing is, they're immigrants, and so they don't really have a strong representation in Congress. So they're just kind of having to see this happen, and get pretty angry about it. But nonetheless, this temperance movement is pretty dang big and pretty powerful. So factory owners and politicians, they're going to start joining this movement because they're going to see that, hey, if people are coming to work sober, then that's good for me, for output wise, right? So they're going to join on board as well. In 1851, Maine is going to be the first state to prohibit manufacturing and selling of intoxicating liquors. And of course, other states are going to follow. So you have this movement that's gaining great strength, right? And you're going to have the Women's Christian Temperance Union form as a result, and it's going to achieve national success with the passage of the 18th Amendment in 1919, which will be the banning the sale of all alcoholic drinks. So this is not something that's going away. This temperance movement. We also have a movement towards the criminals and the mentally ill and schools for the disabled, etc. So anyway, so we're gonna see a lot of that happening. We're gonna see a lot of public institutions as people raise more awareness about, say, neglect in prisons or whatever. And so we're gonna see some changes happening um, in the prisons and mental hospitals and poorhouses. So Dorothea Dix is going to launch a cross country crusade, publicizing the awful treatment of these people in like mental hospitals, and we're going to see a lot of changes happen there as a result of her actions. We're also going to see schools for the blind and the deaf. So we have Thomas um, uh, Gallaudet, and he's going to open a school for the deaf. We have Dr. Samuel Gridley Howe, who's going to open up schools for the blind. You got in 1850, we have special schools modeled after the work of the reformers and their established and what had been established. Here is Thomas. Oh, my bad. Thomas Gallaudet, who is helping a deaf child. And then in prisons, we're gonna have some changes as well. Like we're gonna have instead of prisons, we're gonna have this thing called a penitentiary or penitentiaries, and that's gonna take the place of like a crude jail, right? We're gonna see reforms happening in solitary confinement. I mean, they're gonna start putting people in solitary confinement and to kind of get them to reflect on their sins and to eventually possibly repent and come back into society a better person. However, there was an increase to the suicide rates as a result, and so they had to kind of rethink that one. These prison reforms reflected the major doctrine of the asylum movement. That structure and discipline would bring about moral reform, and you're going to see it also happening in practice in like the Auburn system in New York. So we're going to see public education kind of really taking root here, especially with the middle class. they're gonna want. Look, we have a lot of immigrants coming, okay, and with a lot of immigrants coming, you got poor, maybe even uneducated people, but that they're here and that they want to have a better life. So middle class is gonna start reforms where we can have free public schools for children. So, Horace Mann is going to be one of those leading advocates for the common or public school movement. He was the secretary of the Massachusetts Board of Education. He wanted compulsory attendance, pretty similar to what we have here today. He wanted to encourage teachers to be prepared, to help students, to reach out, etc. You have moral education, which becomes a really big one. So, not just academics, but moral education is important. The McGuffey readers become like that become the resource to help students and kids understand the virtues of like hard work, punctuality, sobriety, all these things. And so education isn't just about academics; it's about morality in this day and age. You're also going to see the Roman Catholic Church start making their own schools as well, or private schools, not public but private. And then you got higher education that's happening in smaller areas, smaller towns, not just the urban areas like Yale or Harvard. And you have people like Walter Emerson who are going to go around and do lecture series and reach out to this young up and coming generation and help them along. So anyway, we're also going to see changes in the family. So it's interesting because in 1800 you have the average size family of 7.04. This decrease to is gonna decrease to 5.42 by 1830. Okay, so with this decrease to children, I mean, so there's just the families are smaller, right? And so there's less kids, and so affluent women especially had more leisure time to devote to organizations based on like religion or just anything to morally uplift society, etc., right? And then you have the cult of domesticity. This is significant because in the traditional farm families, the men were the moral leaders. However, when men started going to jobs outside the home and staying for long times, and working for salaries and wages, etc., and living in an office or a factory, while they're working, the mother then became the moral authority or the leader of the home because that's where the kids were, and so she kind of had to take that role, if you will, right? So we also have women's rights becoming a pretty big thing during this time with uh with the Second Great Awakening. A lot of morality issues were brought up, and one of them was like, what about women? And women are kind of become some of the front runners for the anti-slavery movement, even. And the women who spoke out against discrimination that women were receiving, you have Sarah Grimke in the Letters of Equality of the Sexes and the Condition of Women. You have Sarah and her sister Angelina Grimke were among the leaders opposing slavery. Another pair of reformers were Lucretia Mott, and then you have, of course, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who are going to campaign for women's rights. And that's going to lead to something pretty big and pretty important, which is the Seneca Falls Convention. So this is the first women's conference ever held. It's going to be held in Seneca Falls, New York. And anyway, so uh, women are going to get together, kind of share their grievances, if you will, what's going on, where do they want to move forward with this movement, and at the end, they're going to issue a document modeled after the Declaration of Independence called the Declaration of Sentiments. So this declared that all men and women are created equal and listed women's grievances against laws and customs that discriminated against them. Following the convention, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton led the campaign for equal voting, legal and property rights for women. In 1850s, however, the issue of women's rights is kind of getting overshadowed by the issue of slavery and of course, the Civil War. So it's going to take a bit of a back burner as those issues kind of get panned out. So the anti-slavery movement is quite a big one during this time. Okay, we have a lot of things happening. You have opponents of slavery. They're ranging from people who want to abolish it gradually or instantaneously. and don't even compensate the owners in the process, which is probably pretty fictional, and kind of daydreaming if that's the case. So um, you have a great awakening led many to view slavery as a sin, making compromise with those that defended slavery more difficult. So we have a lot of differences. We have people who just want to gradually sort of phase it out. We have people who just want to cut it off right away and then, not even compensate owners, meaning and they really believe that they could probably push this through, but we know that the South is not going to go for that, right? And so I mean, this is going to ultimately end up in a war. That's how divisive this this topic and issue is. However, we got the American Colonization Society that comes about. So there's this idea that came about where they could transport freed slave free people freed from slavery to an African colony, and then there they can live there. So this appealed to some opponents of slavery, and it also appealed to white Americans who wanted to remove all free black Americans from U.S. society. So they came up with a place in it's Monrovia, Liberia. Okay, and so Monrovia, Liberia would be this place where you could go if you don't want to be in America. You can head out there. Um, a lot of Africans didn't want to go. They made a home in America and they didn't really feel the need to leave. It was their home, right? So, however, there were some people that did go. Probably about 12,000 left and moved to Africa as a result. Um, but that's minuscule compared to the number of African slaves that were still in the country and freed ones. So we have another anti-slavery movement happening. This is the American Slavery Society. So in 1831, William Lloyd Garrison began publication of an abolitionist paper known as the Liberator. Now, that is an event that marks the beginning of the radical abolitionist movement. Okay, Garrison had some pretty was pretty adamant about a few things. He advocated the immediate abolition of slavery in every state and territory without compensating the slave owner. In 1833, Garrison and other abolitionists founded the American Anti-Slavery Society. It got a lot of steam in many areas, not necessarily in the South, because of the whole not compensate the slave owners. Nevertheless, it was a nationwide um, group of people. So Garrison stepped up his attacks by burning the Constitution as a pro-slavery document. He further argued for no union with slaveholders until they repent of their sins by freeing their slaves. And you also have the Liberty Party. So this becomes a political party. There's a group of people who are part of Garrison that kind of like where he's going, but they realize it's just a moral crusade right now, and they actually need to like make changes through politics, right? So you're gonna see the Liberty Party, which their basic platform for the reason of being a political party was to end slavery. Period. Okay, so you have black abolitionists. So these are people who were like um, freed slaves at one point, and they were probably the most powerful in their outspoken voices because they kind of knew from experience where things were coming from and the bad conditions that these African slaves had to face. And so we have Frederick Douglass, and he is probably one of the most influential voices on this issue during this time period. He personally could speak of the brutality and the degradation of slavery from firsthand experience. As an early follower of Garrison, Douglass later advocated both political and direct action to end slavery and racial prejudice. In 1847, Douglass is going to start an anti slavery journey known as the North Star. Other African leaders, such as Harriet Tubman, David Ruggles, Sojourner Truth, and William Steele, helped organize the effort to assist fugitive slaves escape the free territory in the North or escape escape to free territory in the northern part of America or onto Canada where slavery was prohibited. Now, we got some violent abolitionism happening as well. This is David Walker, Henry Highland Garnet, were two northern African Americans. When I say northern, they live in the northern part of the country, who advocated the most radical solutions to the slavery question. They urged all slaves to take up action and revolt against their owners. In 1831, Nat Turner led a revolt in which 55 whites were killed. In retaliation, whites killed hundreds of African Americans in brutal fashion and put down the revolt. These actions hurt the anti-slavery movement in the South, especially because now the South's like, oh, are they going to uprise and kill us all? And so there was sentiment growing for anti-slavery movements in the South. However, with this uprising and of Nat Turner and the retaliation as a result, it diminished in the South's mind the anti-slavery movement and allowed those who were for it to sort of capitalize on it. So other reforms happening going on this time period. So again, we have smaller movements going on. You got the American Peace Society founded in 1828, and that had the objective of abolishing war. They didn't want to go to war with Mexico in 1846. Some reformers fought for laws to protect sailors from being flogged. Advocates of dietary reform, such as eating whole wheat or Sylvester Graham's crackers, wanted to promote good digestion. Several women called for dress reform for women so that they could move about more easily. For example, Amelia Bloomer called for women to wear pantalettes instead of long skirts. One unusual reform was phrenology, a pseudoscience that studies the bumps on a person's skull to assess the person's character and ability. All right, so go ahead and write your summary. We'll discuss this when we return. Thanks.